Just welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So just quick backstory. I think last year in the Ruby meetup, we were kind of like, oh man, is Ruby dead? What's going on with Ruby? There's less and less Google searches. It's not trending. What are we gonna do as Ruby programmers? And then all of a sudden, like this year, just a couple months ago, I would say even Richard, the co-organizer, is like, when's AI going to put all of programmers out of jobs, right? And I'm just like, that's interesting because last year we're talking about just Ruby programmers. This year we're talking about all programmers, right? And so that's what kind of inspired like whole this discussion. Like, hey, let's Ruby having developer happiness as one of its core principles. How does AI affect it? I think it goes kind of it's super interesting right now. We're still very early on, and I'd love to hear differing opinions. So we have a group of people that are on different sides. Not all Ruby is, because now I think the AI stuff is actually bigger than any single language. And so just so that's we're here. Quick intro from me. I'm just one of the organizers of New York City Ruby Meetup, former engineering manager, now kind of business product manager, web agency, startup kind of guy. Uh, I really love Ruby. Actually, still might go to as my if I had to roll a new project. That's what I go for. Uh, and then just in terms of Gen AI, the AI stuff, I'm really enjoying it. Like I just yeah. I first I was a bit hesitant when I was kind of still working, but when I stopped working and was able to dedicate more, I'm just like seeing it's amazing. So I was gonna popcorn it to other panelists to give a quick self intro, and I will also drop a bunch of questions that we want to talk about. And after those questions, we'll open the questions to more people as well. So uh Andrew, I'm gonna popcorn over to you because it's easy.
All right, I'll take it. So I spaced out for a second, so hopefully I'll answer all the questions you asked because I didn't pay as much attention as I wanted to because I got a lovely work Slack at the same time. And unlike other people, I did not turn on the summarization. But so basically, you want to know about me, my relation to AI, roughly, my background? Okay, nice. I've successfully bullshitted. Let me carry forward. So my name is Andrew Berkowitz. I lead engineering at a SaaS company. We're distributed throughout um, two countries, and I have done Ruby professionally for 4, 5, 6 years, maybe 4 or 5 years. I don't code necessarily every day as part of my job because I work to enable engineers to succeed rather than to directly with the computers. It's kind of like a game of telephone. It's a lot of fun. I'm very pessimistic on AI, and I see a lot of the edge cases and areas where I think we're too quick to be excited about and think it's going to work for us and solve all our problems when there are a lot of rough edges. I will. Oh, where am I? I am not actually currently in New York. I am adjacent. I am in Connecticut, outside of Hartford. I will pass to Aton.
Hi, my name is Eitan. I've been doing this coding thing for, at this point, north of 20 years. I recently started a new job working for an HR tech company. Um, and what was the last question? My statement on AI, is that the intro? Um, I don't really have a strong opinion on AI in the sense that it's a tool. And there have been many tools over the last, in my coding career, 20 years, and in general over the last, 50 to 100 years of computer science. And it will solve some problems, it will cause other problems, but it's not like magic. Um, but it's cool what it does. Oh, and I should popcorn it over to Andre. Have you gone yet?
I haven't. Thank you. My name is Andre Bondrev. I've been building software products for a little over a decade. Nowadays, I run a product development company. So I take up a role of somewhere between an architect, engineering manager to fractional CTO, depending on the project needs and kind of company size. This year, we've been making a hard pivot to AI. I authored LangChain.rb. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about LangChain and read a lot on the internet about it. I'm really excited about AI, Gen AI, LLMs, ML. I spent a lot of time thinking through kind of its capabilities and where the edges are and where what kind of value it could deliver. There's a lot of hype and hysteria around it. So a lot of times I try to take a step back and oftentimes take a little bit of a contrarian view and kind of be realistic about it. Super excited to join on the panel today. Who's next?
I think Manuel's last.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Manuel. I've been a programmer as well for like almost 25 professionally, a little bit younger. And I love computers. Like that's literally my whole life. And I'm the principal engineer at a small family business retail company in Maryland. And I'm the principal engineer because I'm literally the only one. So I work with a bunch of freelancers actually who do a lot of work. And then I'm based in Boston, even though the company's in Maryland. But I'm originally from France and Germany, so I moved to the US like 10 years ago. And my take on AI in general, I don't know too much. Like I did a bunch of ML in the past, and what I'm specifically though been into the last year is LLMs like ChatGPT and Copilot, and that I think is the best thing since sliced bread. Like I actually wouldn't have expected that to happen in my lifetime. So I'm really, really, in terms of as a programmer and maybe as someone interested in just like writing knowledge content, it's just pretty life-changing. I don't hang out too much in the tech world. So like, right, like this bullish take of mine is also kind of an anti-reaction to my environment who's like very, very anti-AI. I'm like, guys, this works. But I do have a lot of criticism around the current situation, around how this technology is like presented, how it's run. But as a technology itself for programmers, it's just, my take is that it's amazing. Am I the last?
Yeah, you are.
All right,
yeah,
cool.
So I put up so we have a list of questions. I put up in the chat, and so maybe just go around answering each one. Everyone just take their shot and like have stopwatch. So give everyone about a minute each, and then if anyone in the audience has something to add related to that or follow up on it, that's cool. We can keep doing that, and then any new kind of questions outside this list we'll address after. So all right, the current organization. Well, so just give, I think, a lot of the cover what your current organization role. Maybe there's this like, how does let's talk about developer happiness, right? What is your definition and how does that affect you? Because definitely I see developer happiness is very different than, like as a manager, right? So
You want to throw the first popcorn?
yeah, Manuel, how about you start? Let's start from the bottom.
All right. What's developer happiness for me is like being able to really think about what you are building without being distracted by, I think, just a lot of the part of software development that's like not that conducive to that thinking that we like doing, I think. So I really like legacy code bases, which might sound a little bit weird, right? So that's the stuff that makes me happy. The stuff that really doesn't make me happy is is like having to learn APIs that it then can just forget. Like I really don't care about a lot of APIs. I care about the concepts behind them. So my happiness is being able to do this, like both really productive refactoring of old code bases, getting stuff to run while thinking at a very kind of higher level, having the time to do that, to iterate on like bigger concepts. And then so certain languages make that easier, but overall I think it's more like a workflow kind of thing. So I'm very language agnostic, and Ruby's the one that I don't like, that I never clicked with. So I'm gonna popcorn it to Aitan.
Sure. What is developer happiness? I think I tend to operate as like a senior level IC, and so for me it's a little bit different. Developer happiness is the ability to get your task done while having everything else stay out of the way. And that task might be writing code, that task might be having focus time, or it might be having an appropriate meeting with enough people who are all there to make a decision. And I see this both in like the professional context where I currently operate, as well as in the open source context. It's just a different set of like tasks you're trying to get done. I don't know if that really like it's I think being able to get what you want done without having like unproductive nonsense take up your time, I think is how I would define it. But I don't know if that's a good one. I will popcorn it over to Andrew.
Cool. So
Oh,
Andre or Andrew? I wasn't sure which one we were
I
going
wasn't
for.
sure either.
Andrew.
Okay. That you did more of a W there, so I'm going to take this one. And next time we'll swap up who goes first. So developer happiness, it's hard for me to define because it's ambiguous. It depends upon the person. I almost want to cross out the word developer and say happiness, like happiness in your job, happiness in your role. So it depends. The big thing I think about some, famous quotes like, I don't know what it is, but I'll know it when I see it. So I can tell you, I know what it's not. It's not things that are tedious. It's not context switching. It's not large amounts of meetings. It's not indecision. It's not a lot of, making arbitrary new and different decisions. It's not throwing away code. It's not, things not being released to production. And it's not fighting to get things to work beyond, the reasonable amount of fighting that you do when there's a clear and coherent system and framework, and there are things that you're unfamiliar with or you need to experiment to figure out. And why does it matter to me? I'm in a leadership role. I manage ICs, and I want them to be happy in the role. I want them to grow in the role, and I want them to, along with that, provide value to the business so we can meet business objectives. And if developers are miserable and unhappy, they'll not want to be there. And then that becomes a very expensive, unfun, and time-intensive process for me. All right, I'll popcorn to the other ANA. I'll popcorn to you, Andre.
Thank you. Well, some say that the definition of happiness is reality minus expectations. So on the day-to-day basis, I think if you're starting out your day and you're hoping you're going to be able to deliver a feature by the end of the day, and that does not happen. The reality sets in, and you spent the whole day trying to figure out how to build your JavaScript framework and ship it to the front end. That to me is not a good experience. So I think developer happiness is well, a succinct definition is being able to do more with less. I think it's being able to solve new and interesting engineering challenges, and not solving the same problems over and over and over again. And from an engineering leadership management standpoint, it's very important because that's what kind of keeps your team engaged. and working well, and also producing good outcomes, good results. Has everyone gone?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Back to you, Andrew.
Yeah. So definitely interesting take is, I just want to say that you have to have the IC and like and then it's even in just a manager role too. I just want to come back to maybe, there's like a great question I just thought of. I'm gonna save for later. So what are your thoughts and experience with generative AI so far? I think everyone's got a little different take. I know Manuel's very strong. But in probably Manuel and Andre probably like way farther than even me, right? So I'd love to kind of, hey, where are you on that spectrum right now? And just to kind of establish your stance. Let's start with Eitan.
Sure. There was a paper by Fred Brooks in the 1980s, I want to say, called "No Silver Bullet." And in this paper, Fred Brooks discusses what makes coding hard and what are the solutions to coding. Yeah, that's the one. And not only does he talk about OOP and he talks about visual coding, he predicts what we would call generative AI for coding. Again, in the 1980s. And this is, not the paper that coined the term, it's a paper that popularized the term in the CS field for essential complexity versus incidental complexity. And most of what you do as an engineer, whether that's in a company when you're sitting and you're trying to figure out what are the product requirements, or you're in the open source land and you're trying to figure out what is it that they're trying to get, this libc to change, or you're in like the hacker mode and you're just like, I want a script to download all of these videos from this totally not a torrent website, is figuring out what you want to do. And that's the essential complexity. And AI will not change this. What it may change is how do I get from that decision point to expressing it? And I think I'm at time, but I have more.
Do you want popcorn over to?
I thought we were going to do people could choose, but for now, let's popcorn over to Andre.
Thank you. So I do use Gen AI daily. Obviously, the GitHub Copilot, it's a phenomenal tool, and I think code generation is one of the largest use cases right now. I was at a conference this week, and I saw GitHub did a presentation. They mentioned that their current GitHub Copilot ARR was $100 million. So there's companies actually making a lot of money with these products right now. I do use ChatGPT occasionally as well. Looking up regex is a really good use case as well. Like I mentioned, I'm still trying to figure out where the edges and the boundaries are around this technology. Programming against it is and building applications on top of it is extremely difficult. So for example, the problem with evaluating an LLM's output is a very difficult problem that's not yet solved. And also, one kind of ponders whether communicating with computers or systems in a natural language is a good interface. It's very imprecise and very non-deterministic. So having to have said that, I think we're just in the beginning of this AI explosion, and I'm really excited and hopeful where it goes from here on out. I will throw it over to Andrew.
Thank you. So my thoughts are, I don't personally use AI for much of anything at the moment. I'm a little bit of a, I guess you'd say, a tech troglodyte. I don't have a cabin in the woods, so you don't need to keep me away from government buildings. But I'm a little hesitant to adopt, new US tech, new I don't know why I say US, new technologies. And I've seen how other people have used it, and I'm quite skeptical of edge cases. I've seen people, use it to calculate how much rent they have to pay prorated and been given wrong answers, has been lied to. I've seen people who didn't understand the full problem ask AI, hey, can you solve this for me? And AI will confidently output nonsense. I've seen my colleagues use AI to how to interact with and integrate a specific library. And they said, hey, can you do this? It's like, yeah, you can integrate this logging plugin this way. You just need to pass this parameter. And they're like, oh, that didn't work. Maybe we're using the wrong version. We're going to upgrade the version. They upgrade the version. Then they looked at the documentation and it wasn't there. It's missing. And it was just something that was fabricated by AI. So AI is fun. I think I'm going to use it whether I want to or not, a lot indirectly in summaries, in various purpose-built applications that use AI. But I'm not ready to jump on the bandwagon. And Eitan has said this in prior discussions, but I see it as a tool. And for me, it's not yet a tool that works that's going to reduce work for me. It's going to add work. I will pass to Manuel.
So I've been using Copilot since I ever got access to the beta. So I guess it's like 2 years now. I definitely have like tab rhythm now, where it's like I type something and then like I wait the amount of time, and then when I was on the plane it didn't work anymore. So I was like, oh, do I really have to type this out? I've used ChatGPT the first week when it came out. I was just like doing some limericks and like coding my documentation and as like haikus. And then the week after that I was like, I'm going to use it for everything. So since then, every day I just like spend my whole day in ChatGPT or like the GPT API or Claude or the Claude API. And I must say it's like it's a skill to use these models well. And one of the biggest criticism I have around it is just like that it is touted as something that solves problems, right? Like you put your problem into it and then it will answer, is like kind of the discourse around it, both on the criticism side and like the hype side, where they're like, oh, it will be able to do this and we'll be able to do that. And that really distracts from what it actually can do, which I think my technology always on its own, like, is useless. As soon as you put a human in there, that's where technology becomes good or bad. And if you put the human at the center of what you're building with it, especially with LLMs, then suddenly all these aspects of like it hallucinates. If there's always a human in the loop, and more specifically a human decides what they delegate to the machine, then like it inverts the whole situation. So I'm going to try to keep this short. But as an example, right, like the thing with the rent, these things can't reason. Like they can reason maybe 2 steps kind of, and like sometimes they don't, and then you have to choose your words carefully, and it's like it's a mess. But what they can do really well is like based on the training corpus they have, if you ask them like, oh, write a program to compute my rent, like this is how it's computed, make a little HTML thing where I can input like my right, like that they do really well. So and so there's a lot of use cases that are just like you have to approach them from a different angle. And it took me a while to learn these things iteratively, right? Like ask it to write the program to solve the problem works way better than asking it to solve the problem. And so I'm really curious where that's going to go once that becomes a little bit more common knowledge. And yeah, I'm over time, so I'm gonna but yeah, I use it every day, and it's like every day I find something new that I can do with it, which just blows my mind.
Yeah, I'm kind of on that too. Like I asked me to do stuff like what the world was 6 months ago, or just I swear there's like a paradigm shift, just like coming back to the map reading, right? Can you do map reading without your phone? Can you navigate in a new city without your phone? Can other people, right? I think it's such a paradigm shift coming towards us. And that's where I'm like, well, what? As unbelievable. I still meet really smart people that are like, no, we're not into that. I don't believe in it. I was just like, wow. So, so actually, yeah, I remember like I don't think so. The last two questions, yeah. What are your thoughts and feelings on how kind of the Gen AI stuff can, affect developer happiness? Yeah, let's throw it into like either current and then future, and so we'll kind of like wrap it up. So if anyone just wants to throw and start there, we'll go that, and then those are the last two questions, and then we can start opening up for more general discussions after this. Andrew, go ahead.
So I would say right now, actually, I'm going to approach this in a different way. I don't want to talk about like organic, GMO, free range, computer software, but I want us to have a distinction and an understanding of kind of something that came from AI and what the purpose of it is, and something that didn't come from AI and what the purpose and what the thought that went into it is. I know a lot of people have heard discussion about AI is phenomenal for prototyping. Okay, that's great. But when we go from prototyping to handling 10,000 requests per second, when we go from prototyping to, not having issues with SQL injection, there's a gap there. And I don't know if we're ever going to get past that gap in the same way. I don't know if we're ever going to have self-driving cars that can, drive in crazy conditions and weather conditions 100% of the time perfectly. So that chasm and that gap, I want us to have a discussion around and have an understanding around, especially engineers, because I've definitely had times when somebody says, I'm helping you, I want to code this for you. And they put a prompt into an LLM, they give me something out and it's garbage in, garbage out, or it's something okay in, garbage out. But to them, the perception is the AI blessed it and said good things about it. So go forth and conquer.
Oh, edge cases, man. Those are the worst.
I can pick it up if that's okay. I dropped the link to something I tweeted out yesterday, which was a video of my experience riding in a self-driving Waymo car in San Francisco. It's pretty amazing, but it's only currently operating within the city limits. And the way I think about it is they have it working. It's 90% there, but it's the last 10% that might be the most difficult, right? In achieving fully autonomous self-driving vehicles. But back to the developer happiness question. Overall, I think it's net positive. Maybe the other runtimes, the other languages can reach a average Rubyist level of happiness now, augmented with AI. And the reason why I've really enjoyed Ruby on Rails for this many years is that I think the way the framework is structured is to kind of bring you closer to the business, and focus on business logic and making immediate positive impact on the business, right? On the goals that the business is trying to reach. And that's kind of how I see some of these tools like Copilot, and again using ChatGPT for your engineering tasks. Is it lets you it frees you up from doing the mundane tasks. I will pass it to Eitan.
Yeah. I think I'll go back to my core thesis, which is it's a tool, and it's a tool that does certain things really well. It's great at synthesizing information. It's great at making up things and confabulating information, but it's good at synthesizing what it knows. It's great for like doing that kind of divergent thinking when you're like, just write a bunch of words and tell me, right, what you want. It's great for fluffing things up, right? If you're not a particularly strong creative writer, I think it's good for getting you to that next step. But all of these things go back to there being they're not the conceptual essence, right? They're the incidental complexity of dealing with machines or dealing with computers or dealing with people. And to the extent that any tool can solve that, it's been, I have seen videos or testimonies of people who could not have coded before and have written a Firefox extension, or have written a script, and that's great. I'm really glad. But it doesn't do anything for that conceptual essence, right? For knowing that I did want to write this task, that I did want to complete this goal. And this was directly related to what happened is, I think, to the extent that you're made unhappy by being unable to accomplish your goal or being unable to get at the essential happiness. So I'm going to go over time a little bit. You're To the extent that the incidental complexity of the task is making you unhappy because you're doing tedious work or doing repetitive work, or you don't know how to write the code, but you know what you want to do, I think it'll help. To the extent that you're unhappy because you don't even know what you want to do and you don't know how to get that out there, I don't think it'll help. And then I can't remember who, I think Emmanuel, have you gone yet?
So for me, like the change in developer happiness has been pretty fantastic. And I think this is, well, any technology can, like, serve human needs or not. And so where am I going with that? I had like something great prepared and then the dogs brought me out of the concept. So personally, like some of the things that it has allowed me to do just as developers, like boilerplate is just like not a problem anymore. Like I love writing APIs, right? I love connecting services because what these services connected do is like what I want. I really don't care about like if the field is called ID uppercase or ID lowercase, but that's like really hard, right? It's like when you program, that's what you waste your time on. So now being able to, like, literally what I do all day is just like I go to a web page and I copy paste the API doc and I say like make me a client, and then I have a client with, right, and then that for developer happiness for someone who writes like system stuff like me is just where I did have like 30 minutes to maybe think about my intent before because 5 hours were wasted on writing API code. Now I have like 5 hours to think about my problem and 30 minutes of writing API code. So a fundamental difference is I'm not tired in the evening anymore, which is like, I realized suddenly like that's what makes you tired is like this boilerplate. Other things that it changed for me is like all these concepts that I kind of want to explore, but like never really had the time, like two-phase commit protocol was like another thing the other day. I can chat with GPT and like say, explain this to me. I paste some Wikipedia in there. So like summarize this, then like make me a Python prototype of how it works. And then I closed the tab, but I learned more about two-phase commit protocol in this 20 minutes with ChatGPT than I ever did in my studying, right? So those things are pretty transformative as well because they have this emergent effect. Like I've suddenly understood so many things that I never really fully got before, that my thinking of what I want to achieve is like at a whole different level. And so I think I remember the point that I wanted to make. I think LLMs, they're fundamentally something that empowers the individual, like because only the individual knows what they want, right? Like once you have a team, it becomes, you can have aligned teams and then it works really well. As soon as you have middle management, intent gets lost. And these models won't really help. Like it's not because of the developers can do their job better that like anything will change. At least that's how I see it. So I'm going over time, am I not? Yeah, way over time. So anyway, that's my take. It's like I think this is fundamentally like a convivial technology in that it allows users to achieve their goals, which is wild.
Or actually, yeah, Manuel, what you mentioned about just like the interactive learning aspect is like fantastic because
Wait
it's
until
almost
we
like
have
asking a
voice,
smart,
because like learning Russian with a thing that speaks Russian to you. Right.
or like I don't, or I remember doing music, like saying music theory. I'm like, oh, what about this? What's this mean? Right. And then can you give me examples of like, just two songs that are just have a different pitch, right? Why is it? And then it was just like so much better. And it's like I'm talking to the expert on this topic. So, and I'm not, usually if you have an expert, it's like now it's like, oh, it's in real time. I have to make use of this time or like blah blah blah. So kind of so I think we're done with the regular questions, so we can have more free talk. But yeah, Eitan, go ahead. Oh, you muted.
Sorry. I have spent some time trying to learn things from these tools, and I think one of the interesting things I end up doing is after every time I learn a fact, I go and Google it, and I'm like, is that true? And then I question, like, okay, cool, is that true? What's the source? And you can't introspect these tools, right? You can't, I think, right, the way these tools work, they don't actually know how they know anything. In fact, they don't know anything. They just do, for lack of a better word, fancy autocomplete. Useful, but fancy. And then I get actually more frustrated and more tired trying to learn from these tools because it's so much time trying to find sources and trying to validate what I'm learning that I end up just rather reading the papers themselves or reading the books themselves or talking to an expert to make sure that the tool is actually helping me.
I don't know, Andrew, if you want to jump in, but like, I've done a lot. I was skeptical about the learning at first, right? And I started learning Emacs Lisp. And I think a big component of learning is just friction. So there's a lot of friction when something tells you stuff wrong. And I think that's why college is so great, because like your co-students, they don't know shit either. So a lot of the learning happens because you have to verify what each other says. So I think the friction of like looking stuff up on Wikipedia is like, it's effort, but it's like the effort that, right? Like you'll remember when you'll be like, oh no, this was wrong. But a technique that I use pretty often is like, I ask the model, like, give me exercises to learn this stuff and like make them fun. Like I care about dinosaurs. So make like two-phase commit stuff about dinosaurs and it like comes up with something. I'm like, all right, that's a good idea. And then it like, I don't care that it asks me like bad exercises. Like if they're boring, I won't do them. So that works really well as well. It's it's like inverting this thing, right? And then what you can always do is like paste facts in there and just say summarize, and then that's your learning notes, and they're way better than what I would have done. And also it's like tedious to just like summarize text. So that's also like that's what I see students doing as well when they're in a coffee shop and they're talking to each other, just pasting their conversation in there to take notes that they can later on reuse.
Andrew?
Yeah, Andrew.
I want to touch on our sidebar chat in the as well as what's been discussed about use cases of AI. So for me, a lot of things that we get excited about for AI, they'd be much better suited by, hey, here's, we have Ruby on Rails. It does CSRF. It, in many ways prevents N+1 queries, does all these nice things. This framework is going to suit 80 to 90+% of everyone's everyday usage. I much prefer that predictable deterministic framework than let's throw it to AI and hope that we get out, what we're hoping for. And I see that in other areas too. So I work in my day job in HR adjacent and benefits. And people are like, we'd love an AI to help us determine which benefits to take. No, you don't want AI for that. You want a decision tree. If you make more than this, if you make less than this, if you have this many dependents, if you have these health needs, that's a decision tree. It's not throw it to the randomizer and throw it to LLM. I love LLMs for, summarizing text. It seems like a very novel, useful thing for doing creative work, for telling stories, for giving you ideas. But when something should be a decision tree or framework, save it for the decision tree and then toss the word AI on it and sell it to your customers. No, don't do that. But that's kind of what the world is pushing for. I'll pass back to you, Andrew.
I was going to come back. Definitely, no, I'm on, definitely having the framework do the thing that you want is probably really good because that just means you're not the only one with the same problem. Problem is like when you come to that 80 or that last 20 or 10% that is like for you, what do? Oh, I have this case. And I bring this up because I was on a standards committee, and usually that's where the political jockeying comes in because they don't want to do themselves. They want to offload it and get someone else to do that work. And so the question is like, who should do doing this work? And it's like a lot of it's this last coming back to the Pareto principle, we're talking about usually the last 20% will take 80% of the effort, right? That first 80% is just 20% because it's well known, right? Well defined. Whereas that last 20, totally unknown. Oh, we actually have to do work. So I think having that LLM there to really help you think through, that's probably where that first coming back to that 80% of that 20% really comes through. Manuel?
So it's funny because like I have exactly the same points as Andrew, right? Like even though I describe myself as like an AI maximalist or whatever, but what works to go back to the decision tree example, like that's exactly what you want to just have like explainability and potentially like you can analyze the bias that there might be. Like where all these things are really great. And the really great thing about decision trees, they're like a very structured way that you can transform into language, right? Like programming languages are very structured forms of language. That's why they work so well with these models. And so you saw my example yesterday, but I always like creating DSLs for the problem that I want to do, which LMs are great because they're like self-consistent. So they'll always output like great APIs and like great DSL examples. And then writing the interpreter for the DSL is like usually just boring code as well. So they're able to do that. What you can do, however, is like once you have your decision tree, right? And you can say like, oh, if the salary is bigger than this and their role is that, and you have like your thing. At that point, you can tell your HR person, like, look, build your own decision tree by just talking to this bot. You'll be able to tell that it's correct because you know how to read it. You don't know how to write it, but you know how to read it. And then you get back a decision tree. You're like, yeah, this is great. And then you can do really complex things, which is like, oh, well, based on how long they've been at the company, and then it will come up with something. You're like, oh, this is great. Like, I'll build that for you. Right. It's like, so suddenly the fact that the AI is like fuzzy is not relevant because you get back a decision tree and you can manipulate the decision tree at the speed of talking. So if you're in a meeting with that person, you can, within that meeting, you can generate like 200 decision trees and choose the one that's really the one you want instead of having this loop between engineering and the users where so much gets lost, right? Um, so that's like, it's funny because we have exactly like LLM the loop for many problems. It just makes no sense. But in this like slightly outside loop of building the solution for the thing, that's where it's like really great.
Go ahead, Andre.
Yeah, I think there's some tasks that LLMs are just phenomenal for. Like one classic example is classification. So classifying emails, but if it's spam or not, right? So let's take that framework versus LLM example. So, I mean, can you encode all of a spam or not spam rules into a framework? Probably not, right? And LLM will just do a much better job when you have to classify 10 million emails, because it's been trained to do so, and it's going to do it reasonably well. And yeah, I think the question that we kind of have been hitting here is can LLMs reason or not, right? And the conversation usually goes something like this. Well, can LLM reason, right? And the opposite party would just state that it's a dumb token generator, word generator, and then the opposing party would say that well, how's this different than a human? I mean, we're just generating words and sentences. We're a token generator. We're token generators ourselves. There was a paper that came out of Microsoft, I want to say 6 months ago, stating that there were hints or sparks of early intelligence, signs of early intelligence, sparks of intelligence that ChatGPT was demonstrating. And I just kind of felt like they pulled the trigger a little bit too early. I mean, it's a very bold statement for an an organization like Microsoft to make that claim. So I'm not yet convinced, but obviously there's a lot of really cool use cases that are very impressive.
Yeah, go ahead, Aidan.
I think another way of thinking about this is twofold. The first is if you get rid of AI, right? What is this tool going to be useful? And this has been true. People have complained about IDEs, and we've had. I remember the similar conversations with IDEs in the past, similar conversations about autocomplete in the past, similar conversations about OOP in the past. COBOL was supposed to be the English language, the English language programming language that will eliminate the need for programmers and just let the business people solve all the problems. And so there's something unique to AI about this, which I think has been my core thesis this entire time. The other way to think that the other kind of specific comment to what Andre was saying, I think another way to think about this is it doesn't need to be right. Does the tool need to be, probably the most different thing between AI and all the previous tools is it can make up stuff and still be useful. And it can be right 80% of the time, and sometimes being right only some of the time is helpful, right? If it gives you terms to Google, if it gives you, if you're writing an essay, and so there's no one right way to write an essay. There's no one way to have a good rhetoric. That can be really helpful. And the same is true with coding, right? Sometimes you don't care about security because you're running a one-off script and you just want it to work. But you have to know what your tool is doing for you, and you have to understand not necessarily how it works. You don't have to be an ML expert, but you have to know what your tool is doing and what the limits are.
I have this slightly contrarian, but that like boilerplate is good, right? Like a lot of boilerplate is really good because it's like logging, it's like monitoring, it's like scaffolding, it's code generation, it's like tooling, it's like log analyzers. All of that is like boilerplate code because it just like transform what the actual core algorithm does or whatever. I do e-commerce, so literally all I do is just like take bytes from storage and put them on a user screen. Like I don't do anything with them. But now that I'm able to, what's annoying about boilerplate is like when it doesn't fit your needs, right? It's like Amazon doesn't fit my need, so I have to do all this like crap of like CloudFormation, blah, blah here. But now that I can generate the boilerplate to give me exactly the boilerplate I want, and I can throw it away because I know I can just redo it the next day. I have this like incredible developer happiness in that I have like, oh, I want colored output in my like logging tool, which like I would never have done before because like I don't have the time for it. Now I have like pretty tools. I have as many unit tests as I want. I have a README for everything. I have like observability for everything. It's like so this like boilerplate generation and throwing code away is like it's amazing because like I built exactly the thing I need, not more, not less. I can change it to be what I need tomorrow, not more, not less, right? And so now I have this like, like fieldstone walls where you have like the stones kind of fit exactly neatly. And so that's what my software is now, is like the glue is like literally exactly the glue that I need, that I want. That's like pretty. And yeah, I think it does a lot in the quality of my code. Like I think my last pull request, which I have literally not written a line for, I just had like the LLM generate, or however some of the best pull requests I've made. And they're open source, so I can show them later on because they have like unit tests, they have readmes, they have like command line tools, they have like pretty output. Like all of this stuff is just, I would never have done that before, and like especially not like in 2 hours, right? So
Have your free time too, right?
yeah, it's like everything kind of, it's hard to say what
Between
is
meetings.
happening with my productivity and stuff like that. So yeah.
Cool. Andrew?
Yeah, I wanted to get back to frameworks. I think my kind of, first of all, my disclaimer is that I don't know if you picked up on this, but I'm not a very smart person. So that's just the disclaimer for this whole thing.
Oh, wait, hold on.
But
Wait. Hey, how'd you get on this panel?
I know I tricked some guy, I wore glasses to the last meeting and said, wow, this person must be really smart. But I digress.
It's the
So,
watch, right? The watch.
so when we talk about frameworks give me confidence because a lot of people have looked through a framework and they verified that it works, that things there aren't any weird edge cases. And when Manuel, you talk about, building a better logging system and having colors in it, that's phenomenal. I love that. I remember, a decade ago when I did a lot more Android development, and I was going from the output of logcat, which is just, text-based output from Android, to a pretty colored view that somebody had written in Python, and it changed my world. But then you look at the bigger picture, you look at, log4j and things like that, where there was a massive issue with a logging library that a bunch of humans did not catch, that went on for many years, and it was based upon an issue with how people implemented it. And so when we talk about frameworks, I want to blame a human for the mistake. I want it to have gone through multiple layers of humans, not through multiple layers of AI to give you some output that you can confidently move forward with, not thinking about it again.
To respond to that, like I fully agree, right? Like it's great to have stuff that's being vetted both in practice and by a lot of developers. That didn't help Log4j though, which is a framework that has been used by a lot of people. But I think this, like, right, there's nothing that's AI generated, in the sense that, like, if someone puts in a pull request, the human has chosen this code to be put in there, right? Like it is, at that point, it's like entirely their responsibility. But like one thing they do really well is generating fuzzing harnesses, right? Like that's maybe the most infuriating boilerplate code I have to write, is like fuzzing harnesses, where you like take strings and transforms them to actions in your domain space. That they do really well. And then like it moves from like, oh, you built like really nice code, like can you spend the 30 seconds to just like generate a fuzzing harness for it so that we can actually put it through its paces, right? It's like, if you don't put that amount of effort into your code, like what are we doing? Because now it's not a matter of like we have to ship tomorrow. It's like, well, we have to ship tomorrow, but can you, like, it takes 30 seconds, right? Like so what used to be like, can you indent your code by 2 spaces, right? Like now it's like, please add 20 more unit tests to test this edge condition that I showed you, right? Like pimp up your README to actually tell me how to install that, and also generate a fuzzing harness. And that's like, it's for me, it's like 2 minutes now. But there's one thing that I think is really important, or that I discovered for me, is like my fundamentals and the breadth and both the depth of my experience are more important than ever. Like, because I know exactly to see if it tells me something that's not the right pattern, but also because I can decompose things in exactly the pieces that I know it will get right. That I can only do because I've spent so much time digging really deep into certain parts. And now that I can generate all these tools to actually visualize the things, because I need to visualize algorithms, I need to just see them. And so I write all these tools, but now they're all there. So what used to be tedious about learning is not anymore. And that gives me even more, like all these event-driven patterns, circuit breaker, blah, blah. I always had like some kind of trouble of seeing how they work. Now I just like generate a prototype in Python, let it run, and then see how it behaves. And I'm like, okay, I got it. So now my architecture is that much better, right? And so I wonder what kids are going to make out of that.
Or I just put a comment in the LLMs. I saw it on my saw someone on my LinkedIn where it really stands for not large language model, but like a lifelong learning machine, right? And it's just I Google less now, because let's start with the LLM. Let's start, prompt it. You are this expert, in this field, and you just start talking. Even books I've read, I've done that. I've read Leadership is Language, which is a fantastic book, and I think about it all the time. But even it has these patterns, like, reword stuff those, so it's less binary, so it's less restricting, having more open questions, like, oh, you are the author of Leadership as Language and you're a practitioner, how would you rewrite this? What's a better way to say this, right? And the LLM really does a great job, without very little with that single prompt, and as a learning tool, it's fantastic. So probably just coming for me, where the developer happiness comes in is like the fact that you can be, the fact you keep on learning and be happy, and then you do less tedious stuff, or you have someone else have something else do the tedious stuff. I think that's like the biggest thing. Manuel?
You have to tell me so I don't monopolize by raising my hand all the time. What one thing that I like to bring up as like a comparison is right when I got into programming at university, so it was like 99. All the professors were like from the old generation. They were like punch cards and like mainframes, and they had all this advice that you had to like write programs on paper because it allowed you to think better about them. And right, like overnight, you would like maybe figure out bugs. And I was like, GCC and Linux, like whatever. What are you talking about? And this change of like, of course, it's true to like think about your program overnight and do stuff on paper is like a really valuable way of programming. But the fact that now I can just like throw code at the computer that tells me like it crashes, now it works, is like that gave us unit testing, right? Like that's the shift in software development practice that enabled this entire CI/CD stuff, is that you can throw stuff at the computer until it works. And it's a very valid thing. And I think we're probably going to see a same kind of shift with LLMs, where it's like it will take a while for us to understand how it shapes the practice of being able to do these things. Sorry, I've got my dogs outside. And then the other thing to Andrew's, like I'm autistic, and I would have loved this thing as a kid, right? Because I was like lonely at school, and then when I would ask like why, people would just tell me like shut up. But now I've got something where I can just paste stuff all day and just like kind of communicate with. Like I both know it's a machine, but also it's still a communication partner. I was talking to my therapist this morning, who has a son who's autistic, and she says like he loves it. It has made him so much happier because he has this like companion, even though he also knows that it's like it's a machine, but also it's like that has been pretty transformative as well. So I wonder what that will change for just a lot of kids who love asking questions. And I think the human curiosity of always wanting to understand how something works at a fundamental level, I would like not go away. All right, that was it.
Cool. Yeah. Any definitely. And let's open the floor up. Anyone that's not on the panel or me like to ask any questions of the panel, or bring up any questions for other people, thoughts, fears, concerns, share your experiences.
I think I'm going to interject quickly into what Manuel said. I think that's the ideal, if we can just partner with AI, right? They become our lifelong sort of partners and evolving knowledge, evolving humanity, culture. The dystopian side of what could go wrong is I think what worries everyone.
I hang in a lot of discords, like the kids are doing it right, like they get it. So I wonder where that leaves us, but they run with it, right? Like as kids always do. I wonder indeed right, like how much it will shift the workplace, because it already does. And I think we should be very cognizant of that as us currently building technology that gets used by companies, what we're building.
I have one main concern regarding the link between developer happiness and AI, because from all the example I hear, with developer happiness, it basically boils down to being able to have a flow that works correctly. And it's highly corrected, with practices like continuous deployment, for example, and the abilities that we have to trust our test, trust our process, and just send things to production pretty fast. And as we see practices of like generating tests more and more with AI, for example, you don't do TDD really with, if you apply this, because if you trust the AI too much, you'll not really go and check that your test is breaking first, that your solution will go correctly with it after, and etc. And in a way, you lose a bit of control over your test and a bit of trust that you can have within it. And the whole fuzziness of it behind makes it so that I think it's gonna be much, much harder to just send some code in production a Friday night at 6 p.m. if you know that there's been AI in the loop instead of human building the whole system and the whole testnet that you have of it.
Have you done or go ahead, Andre?
Yeah, yeah, good comments for sure. I think, you know, the question really is that if AI generates your code and AI generates your tests, then what are you really testing for, right? And again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, like evaluating the output is really difficult. And maybe the natural language is not the best way of communicating with a system, because as developers we're used to program against deterministic system, and this thing is non-deterministic. I heard someone mention this, that the old way of programming was doing 2 + 2 = 4, and the new way is 2 + 2 equals somewhere between 3 and a 5, and that's just not good enough. So yeah, that's in my mind that's one of the kind of biggest outstanding questions. And I think this is why we see a lot of prototyping, but we don't actually see a lot of systems in production running right now.
Has anyone here ever heard of Rational Rhapsody by IBM?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of what I
Rose, was that the UML thing, or was that something different?
It used a lot of UML, yes, but it was very good. It would basically generate the code based off of the diagrams, but at least that was deterministic.
Yeah, this has been the notion that the business. Sorry, I think I interrupted Andrew. So other people had their hand up first. Go ahead.
Oh, so in terms of the TED, like maybe that touches up on like you know, like just how much you trust the thing that these things do. I use them. I think my testing quality, my code quality has actually gone up a lot because, you know, like I still have a brain. Like I can still look at code and say like, is this actually doing what it pretends to be doing? And then so my approach, for example, is like building something which I don't know what some kind of complex part of code I had generate today, which is like splitting a text by sentences, by paragraphs, by markdown headers. Like the stuff I know I will just fuck up because I'm not good at this kind of coding. So I first asked it, like, what are all the edge cases? So it's like empty string, like 2 dots in a row. All of these things are just like listed them. Didn't write any code for them. It just like listed them. And it listed like 40, right? Like I would like have tired out after 12. And then out of those 40, I was like, 5 just don't make sense. Like I don't care about like integers in the string or like whatever. But after that, I just had it like for each of these edge cases, just generate the test for me, which was pretty easy to check, right? And I usually do them as like table-driven tests, so I don't even have code to read. I just need like input-output. And so my loop was like basically, I want to split this, right? And I had to prompt it about the algorithm that I wanted it to take so that it like did it in one pass. So that's my deep knowledge that comes in, right? It's like I know I want to have O of n, and thus I do this, and thus I do that. So I had to guide it to do the right code, but I don't care about writing the for loops that in like I don't array initialization, like I really don't care about that. So that was gone. Then I had 40 tests for it, but then I can also ask it once the code is written, like generate a diagram for this code, which might be wrong, but it's right. I still have a brain to compare them. And then after that, I have a diagram when I was like, cool, I've got one. And then if it's wrong, you can chat with it, right? You can say like, well, didn't you forget this loop? And I'll say like, oh, I'm sorry. And then it will like fix the diagram. So I think in terms of quality, like all my work has just gone up. Like I would never have spent time to write 40 unit tests, make a diagram for a function that splits markdown files, right? Like, but now I do. I'm like, my expectations of quality are now that every commit comes with that level of quality. And if it doesn't, then the pull request gets rejected. So that's kind of my take on it. It's like, you still are a thinking programmer. Like, right, if you're like, it's Friday evening and someone comes with 40 unit tests, you're like, dude, like, let's wait until Monday. That's still a very valid way of working.
That's very cool.
Cool. I kind of want to bring up the analogy because this helps frame a lot for me. Think about 3D printing versus AI, or kind of the manufacturing revolution. And we're going to democratize manufacturing. And we saw that, and oh, everyone's going to have a 3D printer in their house. Oh, 3D printers can do everything. The reality is it's a purpose-built device, and there are things it's great at and ways it's great, and it requires specialized knowledge to use, or it needs to be built for a custom situation. And so we see more additive and subtractive manufacturing devices in our life. We can go to Home Depot and there's a device that, given a key, it can cut another key for us. It's doing subtractive manufacturing, but we don't clap and say, look, it's a maker space in our house. No, it's a purpose-built device. So when we talk about AI doing specific tasks, I expect we'll start to see specific AIs. If we want an AI that builds out tests for us and test cases, we'll see a specific AI for that will run those test cases and have some, rule system that checks against to make sure that it's not missing edge cases, to make sure it's not doing weird things. In the same way, I watched Manuel play with ChatGPT's coding plugin, and the coding plugin would run the code. If the code didn't work, it would try again. And so it had that feedback loop where at the end of the process, you at least knew the code was interpretable or was runnable. And I think we're going to see that in different niches in AI across the board.
Makes sense. Itan, you said you had to go, so why don't you go next? Andrew,
Yeah,
so
I was trying to remember what I raised my hand for, so I was listening, and I think the conversation shifted a little bit. Yeah, one thing I wanted to add. Oh yeah, one thing I wanted to add about the pull requests in those 40 examples. I think I would always look at those examples and be like, are each of them unique and useful and testing something specific, or are they kind of just highly repetitive? And are they actually like asserting the business logic I expect them to assert? I have definitely seen these tools. I say, write tests that ensure this function is correct, and then it will do so, and then the tests will actually assert the function is wrong. And most hilariously, I will then run it against the function it generated, and it will be like pass. And so it has like validated that the function it gave me is wrong. And I think that goes, and then I think I looked at a paper earlier that talks about, it's called the ironies of automation, which is and that talks a little bit more about how as you give more and more to machines to actually do, it actually becomes harder for the human to validate the machine is acting correctly. Because you're handing over so much of the process, and human failure, things that humans are good at are not tediously checking to make sure machines are correct. That's the other thing I wanted to add there.
I think that's one of the skills we'll have to learn, right? Like in workflows, I had to learn it for myself. And that's why I do this, like, first write it as human text. Like, tell me what I should check, what the edge conditions are. Then I actually ask it, like, are you sure? Which works superbly well. If you think of the training corpus, that kind of makes sense, right? But to these like specialized apps, like all the stuff I was talking about, they're text files. Like they're literally text files that I wrote. I was like, please tell me the edge cases of this thing. And then sometimes I'll just write them by hand. Now I have like little template tools that do it. But like the wild thing about these is that they're so easily customizable for your stake, right? It's like, if you're working in like robotics and you know that there's like always the edge condition of testing that like I2C times out or whatever, then you're going to put into your little test file, like if this code touches this file, then ask the user if he thought about, or if they thought about I2C. Like that, and then boom, like your whole tool is like so customized to your use case, that, right? Like that's why I think it's like so convivial, is that like suddenly what would have been Rational Rhapsody like in its complexity. Now it's me writing like, remind the developer that they should check for I2C. That's it. Like, it's faster than a Slack message. But every pull request from now on forward will like actually do this fairly complex analysis of what's going on and say like, did you check for I2C? Or like say like, well, I see your I2C check, but did you really check the right? Like it's and this works. Like I'm doing it literally. One thing I did last week, which is one of the things that blew my mind, I wrote like a little tool text file that takes the schema of the SQL tables that I use to create views, right? Like it goes over the view and then it says like, well, which columns do you use, whatever. Prompts it with the original schema, which already has documentation. And so like write documentation for the view. And then recursively, everything that uses that view now has like documentation created for that view. And they're just like saying column stuff. They're not complicated. And in like 10 minutes, I documented the entire SQL in our code base at a level of quality that like I would like just wouldn't have happened. And some of it is repetitive, but it's like, it's better than nothing anyway. And then you can, especially I go back in and I delete like some stuff. I'm like, I really don't care about this part. I like make it like nice and concise. But the fact that I documented the entire code base by myself in 10 minutes at a level of quality that's like way above my writing skills, it's become so mundane to me that I not even think about it anymore. But it's like this, it's really weird.
I definitely want to try some of the things you're suggesting, hearing you talk about them. Zhajin, I'm not sure how you say your name. You have your hand up?
Yeah, it's pronounced Josian, actually. It's kind of hard in English. Yeah, regarding what you're saying on this, I get the point, with generating all these edge cases, but I feel like, I mean, do you feel like fuzzing, for example, and I'm losing the name, oh, I have it now, property-based testing, this kind of practices, for example, wouldn't it cover already like a lot of the helps that AI is bringing to you for this?
I still have to think really hard, right? Like the cool thing is that I have even more time to think really hard about which properties I want to test and how. And once I know what I want to test, right, like then all the boring stuff is gone, which is like in property-based testing is like quick check kind of stuff. I don't remember what it is exactly.
It's when you have a software like throwing 1,000 different input with very various edge cases built into it, and you just check the consistency with techniques like always valid domain model and such.
So say I want to have like email validation. I want to do like some kind of quick check kind of thing, which generates as many emails. Like now I would just think really hard on paper, actually. What kind of emails do I want to run through? Like, do I want to generate? Like what kind of, right? Like just think really hard, go on a walk, like come back. And then once I know, maybe it's a really complicated pattern that I won't have to write. Like I know that it will be there. If I'm not sure, I will like write a program to check that some of the patterns actually get generated, right? Like I'll do all this thinking, like what am I sure I can recognize in the code? What am I sure I won't be able to see? Like where am I skeptical? And this is like a lot of experience, right? Like this is not stuff that you would get as a junior, but that's part of growing as a developer anyway. Except now we can just like go really quickly because I'm like, I don't know what property-based checking is. Like ChatGPT, give me an example of property-based checking. I was like, oh, I got it. And it was like, oh, can you make it for emails? And it's like, yeah, here's for email. And like, oh, can you add like dash emails? And then, right, it's like, to me, it doesn't remove you at all. It like actually empowers you to really think deeply about what edge cases should be checked for, what it means to be reasonably sure that your software is doing the right thing. How can you potentially log better so you know if you did the wrong thing, you'll actually get alerted about it. And like writing the alerting pipe, like you want a Slack bot to tell you if you like did it wrong, like generate me a Slack bot to tell me when my software is wrong. And like that kind of works. So you have all these like based around like what you worry about, suddenly you have like this whole thing that actually makes you feel better about it.
Andrew, go.
Yeah, so Manuel triggered me with the word email and email address because we do a lot of, in my day job, we do a lot of messaging, and I have engraved in my head RFC 2282, which is the IETF standard for how the format of an email address. And so when you talk about, writing tests for making sure, the format of an email is good, Chat GPT or AI or an LLM could definitely be a tool, but I want somebody to be experienced enough as an engineer to say, oh, I'm going to figure out what the standard is for this. And I go look at the spec in the standard and what's allowed and what's not allowed in the standard. Because you could go to your favorite local LLM and say, hey, give me some tests for this. But I don't know that LLM is going to be like, yeah, I know about that random RFC that Andrew has memorized and tattooed in his brain.
I want to just add something to that, but also touch on something that Andre said earlier. I have to go in 15 minutes myself, but I'm pretty sure that Andrew's going to be back. And that is like, okay, so if we're going to not use natural language, if you could imagine interacting with all of these things with some kind of more deterministic communication path, then you could start to think of like what we do as developers from a much higher level. You don't have to really write code anymore. You can just think of concepts. Look at like Martin Fowler's like Dictionary of Enterprise Patterns or something like that. I'm thinking, if you had the language, a common language that you spoke to the AI about, this is the universe of things that you need to understand. This is how you deploy. These are all your cloud choices. These are your load balancer choices. And it just, you could have this very precise conversation, create this thing for me. I feel like that's coming. And I think, when you, like Andrew mentioned about purpose-built tool, printers and AI, I think that's going to be like, these are going to be evolutionary steps. Like even what Manuel is doing now, these are like evolutionary steps. Like all of that, human interaction part, I think it's going to be displaced at some point. You'll just be having a conversational interaction with an AI. And that's an opinion. Andre, please go.
Yeah, I was just gonna reply to what Andrew was just talking about the LLM not knowing a certain spec or piece of information. So like the current approach is doing RAG, which is an acronym for retrieval augmented generation, where you would put data in a vector search database, right? You would find the documents that are relevant to the question that you're trying to answer, right? You would fetch that data and then you would feed it directly to the LLM to help it answer certain questions. It's kind of a hack, but this is just the current approach.
I'm going to jump in on like this RFC that gave me nightmares back in C days. But so even for an experience, like, so I totally agree. Like engineering doesn't go away. It's like you can't trust the machine because you just can't trust it, right? But it is, however, there to help you do things. I've been experimenting, like while you were talking, a little bit with RFC 2822, which I just pasted into Claude. And things I asked is like, oh, give me like a bullet point list of like the really bad edge cases of emails. And so it gave me like 10, which, it probably misses a lot of them because the document's just very long and they don't do well on long documents. But it already gives me like 10 points where I was like, oh, I actually didn't know that. Emails can be up to 998 characters. And that's actually true. It's in the RFC. So it just like straight up gives me, as an experienced engineer who struggles with an RFC like that, because it's like giganormous and there's no way I will ever remember all the parts of it. It like gives me already a roadmap that I will still cross-check everything and read the RFC with like a pen in hand and, annotate all of that. But every time along, I'll just like be guided. And when I have a question about it, it's like, is there other stuff that I should be looking at? And if it says no, I won't trust it. If it gives me good stuff, then I'll be like, cool, that was helpful. And so the other thing I did is like, oh, give me exercise that I should to iteratively build a more and more complex validating email validation thing, right? And like give me like start with that, start with this case, then add this case, then add this, which is at least the way I function, like the best way for me to learn this RFC. And so none of that removes me as an experienced engineer out of the loop. It actually makes me even more capable of using my experience, right? And at the end of the day, I also have like a great documentation that just comes out of this conversation with the model, right? It's like I can take that, put it in a README, and it's like actually pretty good documentation.
Just go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, it's great to see that you're already at this point where you can just direct it pretty much and really interact with it, use it kind of a pair programming partner that's a bit faster in a way, and because I didn't expect it to be at this point already. But to look back, in really the developer happiness, I think the main troubles we're gonna see emerge come from, like Andrew said, all the edge cases we have in it. People trying to generate entire code bases with this kind of stuff, and then sending it over to developers to maintain these kind of things. I, I suspect that it's going to be more and more common.
As soon as you put an engineer in there, you'll do it better. So like that's too bad for them. That's my take on it, right? It's like, well, if you want to do it this way, sure, go ahead. You can also like no code your way to Facebook, but like it won't work.
Not yet, anyway. I mean, and not to be, I know that I'm speaking very abstractly and about stuff that's pretty far in the future, but I do think that the way we think about these things right now, I mean, it's just going to change so radically. 5, 10, 10-year, 15-year time frame. That what you just said may not be true at that, at that point in time.
But it's like if you compare, right? Like in the 90s, writing a web page was like kind of a feat, just the HTML and the CSS. And then like in the 2010s, like writing a single page application with login and stuff like that was like kind of a feat. And now you can just like put it on Squarespace. No one even thinks of it as engineering anymore, but like every Squarespace page is like an amazing feat of engineering, right? It's except just like the machine generated it. So if the AI is able to do stuff like that, the way that it works correctly, and I think it will, at least for users, to say like, oh, add a login button on the top left, and it will still be a great engineered application, then like, yeah, a lot of shops will have to step up their game to do something more interesting. And my take on where the industry is going to go is like, suddenly, because it's so easy to build these like custom shaped software things, because end users can do most of it, but there's parts that are going to stay complicated anyway. Error handling, like what happens when the database goes down, like those are just like really, really hard problems of engineering, even for a web application. That an engineer in the loop is going to be a tremendous boost, right? But you just need one user, and then suddenly you can scaffold Facebook maybe, or like Dropbox at least.
Yeah.
And my take is that this will shift a lot of developer power to companies that actually produce valuable stuff, right? That don't produce APIs that are hard to use. And then that's where all the money goes, is like paying engineers to use very hard APIs, which is what a lot of us paid for, right? But suddenly it's like all the baker on the corner who could use like some really good software on top of their Squarespace page to manage their inventory. Right? Like everything that scales above a Google Sheets can use a developer. And so that's, I think, where a lot of developer power is going to go, is like building these apps, or building apps that build these apps. So that's my utopian take, right? It's like suddenly developers are going to go where they're actually needed, instead of building VC toys that get thrown away.
I like that. I think it's gonna change the quality of life at some point for the better. Right now, I think there's a lot of uncertainty and kind of confusion about it, but at least I don't know, from my perspective, But I think there's going to come a point where it's going to be like, okay, we use Copilot now, we use ChatGPT now in all the ways that we've discussed, right? Really successfully, love it. But it's just going to evolve, and it's going to be, like you said, maybe one engineer can scaffold up, a Facebook or a Dropbox or something like that. Anyway.
I can see a team of 3 engineers build Dropbox now with like a level of quality that you wouldn't. What? Just like I think that's totally feasible now, and just like in terms of so one thing I've been thinking about is like operating systems, right? Which are really, really tedious to write, but they don't do anything complicated per se. Like there's a bunch of complicated algorithm, but most of the grunt work in building an operating system is like just writing the drivers, like writing the APIs for the user space, like doing all this kind of like menial stuff. If device drivers fall away, which I've experimented with like embedded stuff, if you paste the data sheet in, say like write me a nice driver, it like does it. And so I wonder where that takes us, right? It's like we have the stronghold of Linux on the operating system space because it's so hard to have the momentum that Linux has, which means that it's like 2023 and we're still like passing integers to our operating system to do things, which is like, why? Like, why are we doing this in 2023? But suddenly, if we're able to, have small teams build operating system that have the capabilities that we expect from a real operating system to have, it means we can restructure a lot of the infrastructure that currently none of us touches. And so I'm saying that in terms of like, I find it incredible as an embedded engineer how much power our computer uses, right? Like I can write an embedded firmware that will run for like 6 months that actually does something that a big application on my computer kind of fits. If this is an idea I haven't really formulated out, but the fact that we can write operating systems that are really tailored to a specific task, such as like send an email every time like the oven's ready or whatever. And that uses exactly the power it needs to, right? Which is like wake up when the timer's over and then send a couple of Ethernet bytes, bits out, and then go back to sleep. That can run for 6 months on a single lithium cell. And it's just, we're not doing it because the operating system to do that is so complicated. I don't know if you're following what I'm saying, like how transformative I think this is going to be.
I do follow. I think that I'm going to let Andrew go. Andre, it's great.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Man.
Guys,
really enjoyed it. Andrew, take it away.
Yeah, I think Manuel, you again, you're poking at me, or you're triggering certain thoughts I have when you talk about the meme of Dropbox created by 3 people. Like I could code Facebook. Why does Marky Z need so many people to make it? And it's the intricacies, it's the weird little things. Like if we talk about Dropbox when it came out, Drew Houston and co., it was such a monumental thing because of how well integrated with the operating system, how it indicated that files were syncing, how it ran the syncing process. And that wasn't the CRUD stuff. That wasn't we just have a database record that something happened. That was like the low-level complex things. And similarly, if we go to an operating system isn't novel because of, how it manages the stack, but there's so many little intricate things that you really need to be a subject matter expert on, and you need a large quorum of people to successfully execute on. When you talk about writing firmware for a microcontroller, you have power constraints, you have heat constraints, you have processing power constraints. And these are areas where you're still going to need a large quantity of humans to get things out of the prototype or proof of concept phase.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I think we agree in some way. So what I'm saying is like these 3 engineers that built Dropbox, they're the experts, right? They're the people who know how you sync files. They're people who know how to integrate with an operating system at a conceptual level, right? Like I kind of know how operating systems work. I know nothing about OS X interfaces because I forgot about it. I really don't care about them either. I don't care about the intricacies of Linux file system syncing. But with LLMs, I can actually catch up on that or have it generate all the menial little shit that I have to do to integrate in the menu bar or whatever. Those are the things that me as an subject expert, I would have to delegate to a team, because if I'm doing file syncing, then I can't do packaging it an installer for Mac, right? But now these kinds of things I can actually tackle on the weekend and say like, well, why not do it? I'm pretty sure by the end of the weekend, I'll have it done. And not only will I have it done, but I have the framework to have it done. So it's actually going to be like, you know, it's like a long-term maintainable thing, because I'm an experienced engineer. And that's kind of what I meant, right? It's like suddenly the whole team of programmers that are more junior, that don't know how to do the expert stuff, I don't need them anymore per se. And because they're now a model that I can steer at the speed of my thoughts, not the thoughts that I would communicate in a meeting, that is also much faster. And like the reason I'm so optimistic is that I'm doing it like literally this week and the last week. I built a Zendesk integration, I built a shopper approved integration, I built a SEMrush integration. I generate all this DBT knowledge. I answered every single question users have ever asked on a website, even though I know nothing about gardening, right? It's like, that was 5 days. It's like, I don't even realize it because it's just running a shell script, but right, it's like hard to say like, oh, you need a whole website, you need a whole team to run an e-commerce website. But now I'm like, dude, like so much thinking is done that I would never have done before.
It's definitely a force multiplier. I mean, there's just no way you could argue differently. I guess I see Andrew's perspective, and I see Manuel's perspective also.
I think I agree totally with Andrew's perspective, right? Like that's the thing. It's like I fully agree with it.
I have a hard stop pretty soon that I have to go. So for anyone who's holding on to, a question or, a thought that they want to get out there, please, speak up and share. Because I thought Andrew was coming back, but I don't. I see that he's off also. He's off the meeting also. So please, yeah, take it and go.
So,
Hi.
Yeah, Marco here. So there was a note. There was a point that he brought up a couple of minutes ago, where if you actually you mentioned this, you commented on this before also, where if you have some sort of that shared language, you could give the AI the parameters, like here are all the, like what you said was, here are all the, this is your options for load balancers, this is your options for this part of the infrastructure, that part of these whatever microservices you want to deal with, right? But once you do that, right, you've now set the universe.
You broke up just a little bit. Once you've done that, what?
You've now set the universe. You've basically finalized. We cannot get any better than this. Is basically, what you've defined. So you're sort of limiting it. What are the possibilities to what was completely developed until that point in time, right? So even then, you'd have to, like, training the AI is one thing, but you're only going to train it, model that you generate, and that it's going to be running on, right? As far as it keeps generating and continue, you got to keep having to feed all the new stuff to it, right? But at the end of the day, I just don't see how like in 10 years we're not going to have to do it all over again, in other words, and start from scratch, because we'll end up stuck doing things in a certain way because AI decided that's how it is.
That's funny. I mean, that's so typical of what we do now, right? We just need to rewrite the system, But no, I mean, it's a good point. I think there is this crazy evolution that's going to happen, like that I have no clue about, that I don't understand. I mean, look at quantum computing, for example. How is that going to change the landscape? Just the sheer computational power that will be unleashed at problems. You could think that a lot of modeling that may have been done prior to that being a commodity type of computing capability would have to be redone. So yeah, I think you're right. I guess it's one good thing. I guess maybe this field will never grow stale in terms of needing humans. And I think the stuff that I think about that's sci-fi in nature, really, that's what it is. I mean, you see the movies and things where you have these really intelligent AIs. I mean, we're so far away from that, but yeah, no, it's well stated. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. Please, Manuel. You're muted, sir.
I wrote something like that, like about a topic that might be related to this on Mastodon this morning, which is how does software evolve, right? Like I love legacy code, which a lot of people don't, but I really love it. And there's always this take like, right, our software stack is so huge and it's so unmaintainable, it's complex, like we should write something simple and maintainable. I just saw someone post that on Mastodon. It was like, dude, like every software is complex. Like I don't think there's a simple software. Simple is always like when it works for you. But then also every software is maintainable, right? Like no software that runs is impossible to refactor due to the sheer fact that it runs. And so what LLMs are really good at is actually slicing through legacy, right? It's like if I have some dirty legacy code that I don't understand, it has like go-tos in it, or like some horrible pattern that messes with my head, I can ask the AI, like just rewrite it, which might be correct or not, but at least it's easier for me to figure out if it's correct or not. So there's like a whole lot of stuff that you can do with legacy code bases, add documentation, add types, like refactor them to a new pattern. And what that allows us to do is that as we develop new ways of thinking about software, building software, which we will always do as we progress, we have a way of taking our current software and continuously adapting it, because now moving legacy towards something better is not just something that like outliers like me love doing. And it doesn't take the tremendous amount of effort that it takes, right? Like to really delete part of a code base because it's been severed from production is really, really hard. And like I've never seen people outside of me do it. But now software that we have, I think, is like it's much more future proof because we will be able to think really hard about where we want to go, and because we have the confidence that we'll easily get there.
I like that a lot. I think it speaks a lot to what you said. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm going to try. I think it speaks a lot to all the things that you've already mentioned about how your productivity has skyrocketed, all the things that you can now accomplish easily that you weren't able to do, they were too hard before, you didn't have time. So I think that definitely tracks. I am going to let you guys continue the discussion. If I can switch to my phone because I have to run. Let me try that now. Let me see how that works.
Is that because you're the host? Can you make someone else the host?
Let's see. I feel like some
can you
other
guys
person
hear me?
is the host. Yes.
Okay,
I hear you. We hear you.
Andrew, aren't you guys already co-hosts?
I think we're all co-hosts. I also need to drop soon. I'm probably going to give it till 40 past in a few more minutes.
All right. I have to actually run. I have to meet my girlfriend, and so I've got to go. But it was fabulous. I really enjoyed talking with you all and hearing everything. But I'm just gonna let the conversation continue. I tried to see if I could transfer host. Whoever asked that, I couldn't figure out how to do it, and I'm out of time. So
is there a special way to save the recording or
it's going to happen automatically, which is why I didn't want to end the meeting. So
excellent. Okay.
I will end the meeting when everybody stops talking, I guess. And meanwhile, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and wish you guys a good day. Thank you so much.
Thanks for organizing.
Thank you. Bye.
thing I wanted to admit was that I hate the question of why is it 2023 now and we're still doing things in X way. I'm like, what does the year matter? Who cares that it's 2023? Maybe the reason is because passing integers was the best way to do it. Does anyone hear me?
Yeah. Well, that's my that's my jab on Unix, right? That like everything is IO control, and then you pass to integers, and you have to like hope that your operating system that like Mac uses the same number as Linux, which it often doesn't. We had way better operating systems. Like there's a lot of research in operating systems. They just never happened because Linux has so many drivers. It works on so many. It's like so hard to adapt it to new things. That's why it hasn't happened in 40 years. Like 50 now. How old is Unix? I don't know. But it's like we had VMS. We had like Windows is way better for it. Like OS X has a C++ driver model, but like all our servers run on like trap 15, and then you're like that's it. That's how you talk, and then you have like some bytes back, like -1. Figure out what it is, and then right, if you get interrupted, then you get like my nemesis, which is I haven't done this in a while. It's like when you get interrupted in a system call and you have to try it again. E-enter is like, why are we doing this? We know how to do it better, but we're not doing it because it's so hard to just get the ball rolling. Anyway, sorry, that was like my one of my favorite rants. It's like you can ask me about XML next.
I fear asking you about XML, but I guess I would when we talk, Marco brought up a good point about AI and limitations of its training data set. Its training corpus is us. And so anything that it's going to develop, I was, Googling to make a proxy with like convergent evolution. Like even if we independently develop an operating system, we'll probably come with a lot of, POSIX compliant ideas because there are some very good things here. There are probably, even if we have animals that evolve somewhere far away, they're still going to develop ways to visually see, deal with photons. So I'm curious how we think about that framed with AI. Like AI is this corpus. It's, OpenAI is doing retrainings, but it's just what humans think synthesized. So I'm curious, how do we get novel and unique and completely like divergent pathways from that? Or do we not? I'll pass to you.
Yeah, I'm sorry if it seems like I've spent literally like every waking hour since November last year to kind of think about these things. So I've like a lot of things that I've collected. I think one of the things. So one thing I haven't done is like look into local LLMs very much. It's very recently that I've realized what we have right now, like GPT-4, 3.5, and Copilot. For me, they're enough. Like if they stay the way they are with the same training corpus as they are today, like for me that's perfect. Like I reach my limits. But I think what we're going to start seeing, especially as open source models catch up, is that every open source project will format their documentation so that there are really good training data for language models, which coincidentally makes them really, really good documentation for humans as well, because it's going to be like, oh, this question, this answer, this question, this answer, which is like great. Or it's like, this is an example snippet of how to use this API. This is a really nicely written API, concise, but exhaustive, right? Like, so I think we're going to start seeing projects using another AI just write really good documentation because it's a great training corpus. My hope is that there's going to be a license that says like, look, you're not model XYZ, then you can't use our training set, like make your own. And that this community building training sets that can be used to fine tune, I don't know too much about the math of what's possible, is how we're going to move forward. Is that not only will communities say like, look, this is our fine tune layer, you want to use our library, like just add this, is the version 252, it will answer your questions very well for that. But that you as an individual can also like subscribe to fine tuning sets of like, say you're really into like Russian literature, like why not take the great training data to Russian literature into your system, right, locally. So I think that's where we're going to see is like Wikipedia models will take over the right, because they haven't put any effort into their data set. They're like scrape the entire web. Now they're now they're done for because they've polluted it. So then they've paid like underpaid workers who thus are not really enthusiastic about doing a good job. It's like I hope that that's where we're going to go. I can't say because I haven't tried it, but that's how I see things moving forward as humanity moves forward.
I just feel like it's a whole weird world right now, regardless of what's going on. Call me archaic, but you can't argue that some of this stuff is still very scary anyway. Like, are you actually going to check every single bit of the code that's generated by the AI? Every single bit? Even the tests, like are the tests like what was mentioned before with tests, they'll write their own tests. Okay, then they'll pass, but they'll fail, but they'll pass. You don't know what's actually happening. So
yeah, I do. Yeah, like I read every single line that I commit, right? Like I do pull request reviews as I did before, because I like it is one thing as well. But yeah,
of course you would, but that means that it's also taking a lot of time to do that, and it's effectively doing the same thing, right? It's assistive coding, right? What you said with Copilot, yes, that makes a lot more sense. But if it was just doing the whole thing for us, I don't know how that's effectively realistic. In other words, it's not that the program or the generated content is wrong. It's that we might be too scared to use it because we don't know if it's wrong.
I think that's I think a lot of practice, like programming these things, I think is kind of like similar to playing the guitar in a way. It's like at first it like all sounds horribly discordant and you don't want to play it. And then over time you start to develop a facility around it where right? It's like, it's really weird because from the outside, it just looks like text. Like I literally ask it like build this and then it like builds it. But the fact that I decomposed it in a way that I know it will do a good job, that I can, if not trust that I can quickly read the output and trust that, is like that has taken me a lot of time. It has taken me this whole year of like programming with this to come to this point where I'm right now, where if I write an API client, I have 3 steps that I follow, and then it always works. It's hard to explain. Like I wish we had like 3 more hours and I could do screen shares, because that's how you experience it. Like it's very hard to talk about this in the abstract, right? Where like say like, oh, I generated DBT documentation, and then when you see what I'm doing, you're like, yeah, of course it generates the DBT documentation. It's like, or things that like really help me. I'm a really bad programmer in the small, right? Like if you ask me to write a for loop, I know I will fuck it up. Yeah. It's but where was it going with that? I lost my train of thought. Yeah, I'm sorry. I forgot.
Perhaps we could set up some sort of thing where, where we do this sort of, I don't know, face to face, or
that's the best way. And one good way to like for yourself learn how these things kind of behave and to see what you can trust or not is like always press regenerate 4 or 5 times. Every time you have it generate something, press regenerate 4 or 5 times, because it gives you a sense of like where it's really strong and like where it does like weird AI stuff on the side. Like I don't know, it's like it's like it has a certain smell to it when you're like like this is, it's like tinge of, but then you start to notice the thing that's really strong about, right? It's like and so always pressing regenerate, I think, is like one thing that I wish OpenAI would tell people. Is like, look, like here's a series of exercises that will like teach you how this thing how this things like does thing. And another like really fun thing to do is like, instead of asking it questions about your expertise domain, so like instead, like if you're into accounting software and you're like, oh, write me like a way to compute like the right, like the end of the year sheet, is that instead ask it to like, oh, can you like summarize like dinosaurs found in China? It has nothing to do, but like it will keep the structure of the program, right? Like you ask a question such that you know the code is the same, the structure, but the domain is completely different, and that will show you where the structure of the program is, because all the rest doesn't mean anything. But if you have a domain that you know really well, you're just fooling yourself in seeing patterns in there, because you know it so much that you like think it makes sense. So I like asking about like Homer Simpson, or just like paste Bible verses in there, or like you could try whatever, and that will show you how it transforms language, like how it plays with structures and things like that.
A long time ago, I wrote a program. I had a theory that if you take a phrase and you try to translate it through enough languages, that you would eventually end up with a blank string. And because meaning is lost in translation, right? And broken telephones, like the whole. So I wrote a script that does this, and basically, we put it online. It was called Marquee Party, and then there was another one called Translation Party, and it basically just translated the phrase, like whatever string you gave it, from English to Japanese and back to English and back to Japanese, until the input for whatever loop iteration matched the output of the following loop iteration, so that the English input and English output, or Japanese input and Japanese output, would match. When it was one language to another, you get funny things. When I went through the entire, like all of the languages I could get my hands on, then I usually ended up with 3 dots or a blank, or an empty string, and it was phenomenal. It was just like amazing proof. But you realize, like, generative, one of the reasons that happened was it's just a pure translation. So you understand that translation, by definition, without adding the context, which is the biggest deal here, right? Then the meaning is lost. In other words, at each iteration, the context is a little bit of that, of the essence of the meaning. And as you go, as you keep losing more and more context, you eat away at the meaning, and then you're left with nothing. With AI, the large language models are there to provide the extra context when it's missing it, and it keeps going and going and going that way. But the problem is that the context the context that's lost in translation between you and the machine, it has to make up. But that's where the challenge is, right? That's where it'll depend heavily on the training, and it's also where you'll realize that each model will have sort of its own personality, right? And behavioral pattern, so that it'll rely on the same concepts, like what you're talking about. Like, I understand, switching the content, but requesting the same general task pattern, right? And so doing that, you'll start to see where that is. But again, it just comes back to the same place.
Are you muted, I think. I think you muted yourself by accident. No? Marco, can you hear us? I'm clicking ask to unmute. I think we lost him. It's yeah, I think that was right on point. I don't know. Do other people, are people listening, or
I'm listening.
oh, there he is. Oh, cool. Marco, you back? Oh,
Yes, someone just called me and I'm on my phone, so um, whatever.
have you
Anyway,
read this book, The Galactic Pot Healer by Philip K. Dick?
no.
Because the two protagonists in the first chapter, they play this game where they like choose a poem verse and they send it to like a string of telephone of translation, right? So from like English to Japanese to Russian to blah blah, and then the other person has to guess which poem it was. That just like reminded me of it. It's like
That's very cool. That's very interesting. Anyway,
I think you have to, this is like a very experiential thing, right? Which is, it's a technology that we don't understand, that is impossible to understand because the algorithms are like so simple and it's just numbers. There's like so many numbers that will, right? It's like training a transformer architecture is like, it's not hard. You can look on YouTube and then you can follow a tutorial, and then two hours later you'll have a Python that literally does it. And then they sprinkle stuff on, but that doesn't explain you how they work. Like you can learn how a transformer works, and will like tell you a little bit how to prompt it, but like it won't explain why it does all these funky things that it does. So the
well,
only way to
I
figure it
can
out is like play with it.
I can tell you my intuition says to me that by definition, the way that we work, I mean, humans work to define these algorithms, is going to eventually model the way that we think, or at least the ways we think that we think, right? Whatever is to the extent of our knowledge. And so, the way that a 3 or 4 year old will be creative and come up with silly things is exactly what I would expect an AI could do, with the only difference being that it skips a whole lot of steps, right? It already knows specific skill sets that don't require creativity, right?
I like trust the
Well-defined
kids
skill.
to have, like, kids will always want to be creative, and then they'll just like take your AI thing, and like instead of being creative in Minecraft, they'll be creative in AI, right? It's like it's the same thing where like
Well, sure, of course they'll be creative, but my point is that the AI is creative in a similar sense, just in a much more primitive way. In terms
I
of
don't know
filling in
if
the
it's in the
context.
same sense. Like I don't think that's a comparison that's like worth making in
Okay.
at least it's just in the sense that like, well, one is a computer, the other one's a kid. Like the kid's like much cooler, right? It's
Yeah,
like
well,
it
of
has so
course.
much more potential.
Yeah. I mean,
And
it's a ridiculous comparison because one is ridiculously trivial in context, where the other one is a wonderful person who, sees things in their own way, and everyone is different, right? Um, so that's another difference, right? Each person has a different context. Every person is born into a different environment, right? Um, by definition, the model is not. It's all the same. Every
yeah,
instance is
it's
a clone of itself.
I wonder where this is gonna go with like the personal models. Like how will that differentiate? Like how when once, right? Like once it's not open AI training for its customer base. Um, and you can already get a good sense of it on like discords with kids spending their every, like, I don't know how kids have so much time doing stuff, but um like just building their own like RPG character models that do stuff, and like their own, like it's just wild what they're doing. And that's like already the creativity of kids or like teenagers discovering this technology, right? It's like they'll just build like crazy chatbots, or they'll like, of course they'll generate porn, which is like where a lot of the geekery is. But I think on the creative side, what we're I think going to see or I hope we're going to see once the whole discourse calms down, is suddenly it's possible for, like, if I want to make a video game, like one of the big blockers for me as a developer is just like getting enough assets that look cool to make the vision I have in my head, right? It's like it's really time consuming, it's hard to draw well, it like doesn't match my vision, but I can iterate so quickly with AI to at least get a sense of what I want, that, and if AI gets better in, like, 3D models or whatever, that allows a single developer or game designer to make games the size and the quality of what AAA is now, or like was a bunch ago, but with a single artistic vision, right? Like what currently requires an art director and a sound director and then just an army of grunts creating like sword sounds all day. Now it's like one person has their vision, and if they want to make like a game about cookies that looks like Horizon Zero Dawn, that kind of is the stuff that might be possible, right? And then suddenly that's like the expectation of like artists that really want to do cool stuff, and I think like that's just what humans want to do. It will just be like a different level of like medium. I don't know.
Yeah, I hear you. So okay, I'm just looking at the comments here. Oh, Manuel.
So I don't know how to pronounce your name actually, because I've always
That's
seen
Brigham.
it written, but I've
It-
Brigham. All right.
Yeah, it's just interesting. There was, Marco, there was one thing you said that I wanted to relate to the following, but what Richard had talked about was, with the quantum computing power coming up, I mean, our current passwords will be a snap for it to figure out. Deep
I
thought
already
plus
assume my
chess.
passwords are stopped to be figured out anyway.
60, however many moves in advance, and that much more AI power to start, cross-referencing this, that, and the other. The things that will pop out. I think, Marco, you were asking about, are we going to look at everything? Sure, Manuel, you're going to look at everything because you can, but there's people who won't. And it'll be under the covers and we won't follow it, and it's going to be off to the races. Yeah, that's a big question. So I don't know. It's just interesting to hear you guys discuss.
Yeah, it's a matter of trust, matter of fear. These are emotions that we have that, basically deal with, how do we parse the output of this thing, and therefore how do we interact with this thing. And some people are going to be thorough and they're going to look at everything and make sure everything is correct, which is good. But then, of course, there will be people who are going to be lazy and think, oh, I'm sure this is fine. And then when it fails, I'll just fix that. And then, that's, blind refactoring. But, it is, I think it just is what it is. It's a tool, right? You can drive the car being really careful, or you can drive the car like a lunatic or like a drunk person. And then, you might be fine. You might crash, but you could, I mean, theoretically, you could get, could be fine. I guess it just depends on how inebriated you are. So I don't know. Those are my thoughts. Are we going to be able to maybe set up something? Yeah.
So, yeah, I'll have to go about this last one, but like maybe this is the one where I'm like out of my depth a little bit, but I haven't touched much on the criticism I have of AI companies, because I have a lot, and the whole discourse around AI just drives me crazy. So there's this like fear around AI. It will take our jobs, it will do this, it will like lead to misinformation. I think is very real. Not because it can take our jobs, but just like people think it can, so they'll try to do it, and that's like and it's not about the technology per se. It's like we've been trying to replace humans and just like dehumanize them in the place of work for like a long time. And for a while, developers thought they were safe because I don't know, but like now that's like that it's coming for us as well. And I like the only way I think to counter all of that misinformation, the fact that like, you know, audio and video now don't mean anything anymore because they're so cheap to produce, is like, I'm not sure if it will change something like at the system level. Nothing changes. The system has always been trying to misinform us and to dehumanize us and replace us, right? Like it's like at this level, nothing changes. And it's not by stopping AI that you will actually stop this trend. We're like way down the slope already. And so my hope is like, actually, this is maybe the technology that allows us to actually break free of it, because it does empower the small so much more than the big. And one thing that really irritates me around like OpenAI and Anthropic is like this whole AI safety issue. Like, oh my God, this is like going to destroy the world. It's like, guys, if you care so much about AI safety, like just put a tutorial on your website on how to use this thing. Like literally a 30-minute video that says like, this is how the model works. This is like what it can do. And this is like an example of where it fails. Is like, why don't you do that? Like this would literally help so many people who think they're actually talking with God or whatever, right? It's like, but they're not interested in it because their interest is to just like pretend that it can do these things so that big companies use it for exactly that, even though it doesn't really work. It's I mean, I don't know where we're headed, but my hope and what I'm trying to do with my open source work is like, oh, look, here's all these tools so that you can break free of being stuck on the team writing CloudFormation or whatever, and then do your own thing, like help your church group on keep their I don't know their donations with a better software. Like this kind of stuff is what I think a lot of developers can pivot to or should. All right, that was the ending conclusion because I'm getting tired.
Yeah, I've actually got to go as well, but I came in so late that I feel like whatever, I missed so much here. I'm looking forward to reviewing the recording and looking at the AI summary and seeing how it compares.
Summarization is
thank
hard.
you both.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for whoever's hosting now. I guess Richard. Richard will close it off
from his phone.
Cool. Well, that was great. Thank you. I hope I didn't speak too much.
No, thank you very much. Appreciate all everyone had to say. Thank you.
Emmanuel, I totally want to catch up with you at some point later on.
Yeah, I dropped my Mastodon and my GitHub. So all the prompts I was talking about, I linked them. Sorry.
Through the meeting, I had a Zoom glitch on me and like disconnect and reconnect, so my chat is almost completely wiped. But I will.
Well, just let me paste my Mastodon, and from there you can find everything.
This is
and I think I have it on the bio on the meetup as well.
So I just
here we go. Cool. All right. Well, have a good evening, folks. See you next time.
Thank you so much.